What's up, everybody? Amiga Bill here. I just finished up an absolutely epic live stream over on my Twitch channel with the legendary Commodore 64 and Amiga composer Chris Huelsbeck. Now, I had so much fun on this interview, and Chris gave us so many great stories. I don't want to limit it just to my Twitch viewers who watch live. I also want to share it here on the Guru Meditation YouTube channel. So here's my interview with Chris Huelsbeck. Enjoy. Chris Huelsbeck is one of the most legendary video game musicians, composing over 70 video game soundtracks and releasing over 50 studio albums. He's one of the first video game composers outside of Japan to release a studio album of his music, and he's even had symphonies play his music. Some of his credits include the Turrican series, the Great Giana Sisters, Jim Power, Apidia, R-Type, and Star Wars Rogue Squadron. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome Chris Huelsbeck to the stream. What is up, Chris?
Hi, Bill. Long time in the making. I remember we were talking already years ago that we should, that I should appear on your show, and it never worked out. But I'm glad it's going now.
I'm so happy, Chris. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you on the stream, and thanks so much for taking the time today to come and hang out with me and this amazing community that I'm so lucky to hang out with every Sunday. I really appreciate you coming on the stream.
Yeah. Actually, I remember we met at the Amiga 37 a few months ago.
Amiga 37 was amazing, Chris. It was Amiga 37 blew me away. That Amiga 37 felt to me like it was, I don't know, like 1992 all over again, going to like a World of Commodore or a show. It was incredible. Did you have fun there?
Absolutely. This was already like, I think the fourth or fifth time I went to one of those shows. That series is happening every 2 years or so in Germany, and it's growing and growing. So I'm looking forward to future events as well.
While we're talking about Amiga 37, what do you think? What do you think about this whole resurgence of Amiga and resurgence of retro?
Absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating that it's still so alive and in some ways even growing or being rediscovered. That is mind-blowing to me.
I know, it's mind-blowing to me too. I think it has a lot to do with the magic of these machines. The machines are very, very magical and good quality games. And, a lot of us are getting older now, and we're kind of remembering the past a bit, and getting nostalgic about it. And a lot of folks are now who were into games back then were just, young people, and now they're professional game developers. So like, oh, let me see what I can do with my old Amiga.
Yeah.
I think it's really, really cool. So, Chris, I've listed a lot of your credits here at the top of the interview, and it's an incredible list. I'm wondering, right off the bat, like, what is one of your favorite pieces of music that you ever composed?
That's always like a tough question to answer. I think for every system, there's probably one or two pieces that I'm really proud of. Overall, I think we can all agree that Turrican was the milestone, the Turrican series. And of all the ones of that is Turrican 2, obviously, which really, I could do what I wanted to always do, like make electronic music with beats and have it represented in that way, and also push the limits what the Amiga hardware could do. With the 7-voice intro of Turrican 2, I think that's probably the one that's best known and that I'm still very proud of course.
It's such an incredible piece of music. I want to get into some of the technical details of it and also talk about the Symphony Orchestra playing it. I got some clips we're going to play of that, which is absolutely amazing. You've earned the title of like sound musician in many of the magazines back in the day. Can you put your finger on like what the magic is to your music?
I think I have a really good talent to develop melodies that are sticking in your ear, that you can remember and even like sing under the shower or whatever. And it's the melodies. I mean, I've never really developed any songs per se with lyrics. I mean, I tried a few times, but I mean, from my career with game music, it was always about those recognizable melodies.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Not as many vocals in the game music, and it's all about like a catchy tune, right? Is that when
Yeah.
it comes to like composing music for games, is the melody the important part? It's always it's tricky. Like, is it different composing music for games than it is just composing a normal song?
I would say it has changed over the years. I mean, when you look at modern games, the scoring is usually very similar to like film music, where it's supporting the images on screen, but it's not getting in the way. Whereas in the old days, this was like we were just doing whatever we wanted, basically. Um, and sometimes the music would even be a total counterpoint to what you would see on screen, and it would be kind of its own thing. Um, and But I mean, yes, it's definitely different than just composing something from scratch that is not attached to anything. You're always trying to support whatever you're scoring under.
That makes sense. I know some of my friends compose music for film, and it's the same thing. It tries to support like the emotion that's happening, in the film, or the emotion that's happening in the game. And so, like when you're doing, I know game development is a long process and difficult and tricky process. Like, how can you explain that process to me? Like, do you start making music for the game? Do you have like a general idea, or do you wait until the game is far along in the process so you can like have something visual to see what to work with?
Yeah, it's different from project to project, but most of the times when I worked with developers, and particularly also in the old days with Factor 5 and Rainbow Arts, I was right there during the development. From the first time we were talking about it, and I would look like at concept art and the basic idea of what the game should feel like, and then go from there and develop an idea what kind of music could support that. Or in some cases, as I said, like developing counterpoint to maybe like a certain scene where it would go totally opposite to what was on screen, just to make like a statement. But yeah, usually I would have very much insight from the very first day of development.
You would get an idea for the
And
genre, and that would kind of
yeah.
start to get in your head. Yeah, exactly. Well, speaking of the early days, we're talking about Factor 5 and Rainbow Arts. So let's go way back. Let's start way back, because I'm really lucky. I have so many amazing people that come here every Sunday to watch these streams, and some of them are Amiga experts who know like way more about Amiga than I do, and some of them are like me, like really big fanatics, and others are just getting into it. They never heard of Amiga before, Commodore 64, and they're just getting into it. So let's start at the very beginning. Like, what came first, like your love for music or your love for computers?
I definitely love for music. I actually started very early. My family was very musical. My grandma was a well-known piano teacher in town, and my aunt and my mom, they were also piano teachers. So I had like exposure very early, and we had instruments in the house, pianos, obviously. And I would like start hammering around on those instruments like from age 4 or something. And then for a while, my grandma tried to teach me piano. I think I held out for 2 years to do like classical piano training, but she was very old school, and she would like get mad at her students if we made mistakes. She would sometimes hit us with a stick on
Oh
our
my god.
fingers. And I remember like there were tears sometimes, when you weren't practicing and weren't like hitting the notes or whatever. But overall, my grandma was also instrumental in getting my first computer, the Commodore 64. So it was not all bad, but I remember like I felt classical music training was just not for me. And then I discovered, this was still before C64, I discovered electronic music, like Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream and Jean-Michel Jarre, those things. There was a radio program once a week that I listened to. And so my early teens, I was dreaming of owning a synthesizer. And my family couldn't afford that. They were like very, very expensive machines. I mean, we had pianos, but like buying a synthesizer was kind of like a dream. And then the Commodore 64 came out, and I read all the specs, and that it had a real synthesizer sound chip, the legendary SID chip. And I knew this would be my chance to create synthesizer music. You know, get that computer because it was relatively affordable. And so I saved up money, and I was delivering newspapers. And in the end, I remember I wanted to buy one, and I had like 400 Deutschmarks, and the Commodore 64 was 500 Deutschmarks. And I was standing there in front of it, but then like next to it was the Atari, what was it, the 400 or 800, or 800, and that was just 400. And I almost wanted to buy that, but my grandma, she knew that I wanted the Commodore 64, so she helped me out and gave me another 100, and then I could bring the Commodore 64 home.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. That is awesome. Yeah, and I can sympathize with you, you know, with your grandma's strictness and the ruler, because I went to 9 years of Catholic school, Chris. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I know the feeling. But
anyway, so then I brought the C64 home, and I thought like, oh, let's start making music with it. And then you turn it on. It's not like nowadays, you know, where you get like an iPad or a PC and you can download all these music making apps. I'm turning the Commodore 64 on, and all I'm seeing is this blinking cursor. And now what?
Yeah.
I have to learn programming.
Oh.
You know, and then I typed in some demos from the book, and it sounded really bad, and I wasn't happy with it. And then I learned more basic programming, and that wasn't good enough. And then I saw all these games with amazing music. That was also like the time where I think a few months into my programming, I heard one of the early musics that were better, like from Martin Galway or something like that. And I thought like, man, this sounds good. I think there's something here, but I had to get off basic. And then I learned machine language assembly. And that really made a difference, because now I could like, I could develop my first sound driver. You know, something that would play music that I conceptualized from the memory and that kind of stuff. And that was really promising. I actually developed one piece that became my first game music, because a friend of mine, he was really good in developing games, and he had already sold a game to a company, but he wasn't good with music. And so I made music for his game, and that was called Planet of War. And that was basically the first sound driver. And then pretty quickly after, there was a contest in a magazine, and for C64 music. And I thought like, oh, I wanna send something in and maybe get on the cover disc or something. And so I composed Shades, did a new sound driver for that one, and hacked that into memory, sent it in the day before the deadline, and to my surprise, it won first place. So that's basically how it really started.
Wow! Well, congratulations on the win in that. It's called 64 magazine, right? That's amazing. I'm just blown away by so many things, because you know, a lot of people are artistically gifted. You know, they can, you know, do great music, or they can paint or do great artwork. But to be so gifted with music, and then teach yourself like machine language, assembly code, like that's no easy task. That's extremely technical. You know, for folks who are watching and don't know what that is, that's like you're basically like putting just a series of numbers into the computer. It's not like today, like you said, it's not like today when you can you know, open up an iPad and you have like, you know, all these incredible music creation programs. Like you were literally programming in like bits and bytes to create the music. That's just absolutely amazing.
It felt daunting at first, but then again, when you're like 16 or 17 years old, you're like a sponge, you know, learning very fast. And also I had a goal in mind. I mean, I knew what I wanted to achieve. And then when you look at machine language from like the smallest building blocks of it, once you understand what they're doing, then it's all up to just like conceptualizing what you want to do and building it out. It's like Lego, basically.
It's a lot different than, I guess, sitting at the piano and start banging out some notes, right? Like, is there an
Right.
experimentation that you do, or do you have an idea of like how you want the sound and then you program that in?
Yeah, it was a lot of experimentation and also like learning some programming tricks from my friend who did the games. Um, and then basically you're learning things like, oh, how do I get like notes into the computer? And then you make up your own language. And it was hexadecimal numbers back then, but I mean I knew the note names, so pretty quickly I decided, okay, this is too tedious to remember if like a hex number of 68 is middle C or something like that. So you would I started to program an editor that became the sound monitor that would represent those values as like note names. It would then say C octave 3, basically, and you would type that in, and that the editor would translate it into the right hexadecimal number in the memory. So things like that. And so step by step, I was developing this thing, and it got better and better. And then once I had the sound monitor, I was actually calling up a few companies, including Rainbow Arts, if they needed music for their games. And that's when it really like started. And I got my first gig there. And then pretty quickly after, they offered me a full-time job.
Wow, well, that's so much to unpack there. That's incredible, Chris. We'll get to the Rainbow Arts in a minute, but actually on archive.org they have a Commodore 64 emulator, and I just pulled that up on screen right now so people could take a look. This is the program that you actually made in order to make
The sound monitor.
yeah, this is called Sound Monitor, in order to make making music on the Commodore 64 easier. So it's just so people get an idea. This is the easy way to do it, and you can, if you look at it. I mean, I don't even know how to use this as an emulator, but you can see that there's different. There's looks like there's 3 tracks, and you type in different values for each track in sequence.
Something like that. It's actually, some people say that it is the grandfather of like the sound trackers in general, that kind of concept where you type in the notes with like a note name and an octave, and then you have different effects that you can apply. And that was an early version of that concept.
Oh, that's amazing.
It
Yeah,
made editing the music so much easier. Yeah, I see it right there.
I can only imagine. I mean, it's so funny because I mean, programming hexadecimal must have been extremely difficult. So yeah, you basically are the father of tracker. With Pro Tracker on the Amiga, like one of the classic programs, and Octamed,
Yeah.
right? And this was the original. This was one of the first ones. That's absolutely amazing. I
Yeah,
also okay.
and when I look back at it, it's still like very basic and complicated to use. And if you don't initialize it right there, you are actually at page 0 of the memory. You could do real damage to the operating system right now if you typed in any numbers and stuff. But it's it was a stepping stone for sure.
Amazing. That's really cool. Let me switch over here. I'm gonna close this. And so you mentioned a few of your early pieces. I've got Planet of War, a video of Planet of War queued up, and I also have Shades. You want to take a listen to it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
If
let's
you
do
want
it.
to play.
I'll start with Planet of War. So Planet of War was your friend's game, correct? And
Right, and in fact, that did come out almost a year after Shades, because he had trouble with the publisher, and then in the end, I think it did get released, but it was after I had already done Shades and some other stuff.
let's take a listen. This is Planet of War.
So very
It's
basic.
amazing.
If you go to Shades now, the interesting thing is there's only about 2 months between Planet of War and Shades, and I rewrote the sound driver completely from scratch. and you can already hear the improvement of the abilities and the sound quality.
Amazing. It sounds incredible, Chris. It's so hard to believe that this is coming from a Commodore 64 SID chip. It's something I could listen to today, and it sounds perfect. It's absolutely amazing, Chris.
There's an interesting thing there, a side anecdote. So when I started at Rainbow Arts, they promised me to buy a professional synthesizer, and the one that I picked out was the Ensoniq ESQ1. Because I had once played it at a trade show or one of the music stores or something, and I was really blown away by what it could do. And the interesting part is I learned much later that the developer of the ESQ1 was the same who designed the SID chip.
No way!
Yeah, so it was like, it was, I felt at home on the ESQ1, and now I know why.
Oh, it's a small world how that works. It's so funny. It reminds me of like, I actually did start out with Atari 8-bit. You were talking about the 400 and 800. That was my first computer. And I went from there to Amiga, basically. So I was kind of following Jay Miner and Joe DeCura's footsteps. They both spoke to me. Proton Fig, thank you. This is a great time. Proton Fig, thank you for the question. If anyone has a question for Chris, please do at Amiga Bill, like Proton Fig there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Q&A at the end of the interview. Lots of folks, lots of my patrons and followers sent in some really great questions. So I'm going to ask Chris all the questions at the end. So Chris, that's really, really cool. So you were essentially like cold calling companies, and you got a job at Rainbow Arts, which is pretty incredible. What was it like when you went to Rainbow Arts?
Yeah, I mean, I got directly out of school a really well paid job, and so I thought like, okay, now and no parents anymore, you know. So I was like, I was crazy. I remember like, and Rainbow Arts was very like open to however you're gonna get your stuff done, doesn't matter when you work. So I would sometimes work through the nights, and I remember a few times I would like work for 48 hours straight and just like make music and discover things and do some programming tricks and you know, make patches on the Ensoniq synthesizer and stuff like that. I couldn't stop, you know, and then I would sleep like for a day and then come back and do another full days in a row and things like that. But in that time I was also like, there were some games in development at Rainbow Arts, so I was making music for all those, but they took a few months to get ready, and so I had a lot of downtime to explore and try to push the envelope on the SID chip. And one of the first things I tried was like to get more out of the SID chip than it was designed to do. I heard some program that played some digital drums. And there was just like a program, like a simple drum computer, but it had these like really cool samples that were playing from memory, or 4-bit samples, you know, like. But I was fascinated by that, and I looked into how they were doing it, and then developed my own way of like how could I program this myself, and then found a way to play it along with the 3 SID voices. And so that was my 4th voice on the SID chip, and I had it ready in the summer of '87. And you remember it was used in in a few of the early Rainbow Arts games, including Giana Sisters in the intro music. But the thing was, the games were not ready in the summer. It took until fall. And then all of a sudden, Martin Galway had Arcanoid out, which was another game that used a similar concept. It wasn't like plain samples played from memory like I had, but it was something similar, like short snippets of 256 bytes that would repeat, and they sounded like little drums and things in a fourth voice. And that I always bring that up. I was a little bit annoyed that my samples were already there, and some of it I couldn't release it, at the time.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, so that was a fun time, really, working at Rainbow Arts.
Yeah, that must have been frustrating for you. But I'm also blown away how technically savvy you are. How you figured out this trick to get more out of the SID. And being very technically gifted, I believe you also made your own music format called the TMFX, the Final Music System Extended.
TMFX was, yeah. This was funny because I always thought, like, I'm going to rewrite my sound player one more time. And this is the final one. So I called it the Final Music Player, And then of course it wasn't. And then I developed it further, and then it became the extended version. At some point I gave up on naming them, but yeah, that was TFMX. And it was also the same concept then was going over to the Amiga, and then later even to the consoles. And up to the time when I actually moved to the US, I developed it further with Factor 5, and it became Musix, which was kind of like a middleware that Nintendo even took and made available to their third-party developers. And that Musix system still used the same concept that I developed with TFMX on the Commodore 64.
Wow. Did you? It sounds like you created a lot of your own, music software. Starting, all the way back with the first program you made on the Commodore 64.
Sound on the Amiga as well.
Yeah. On the Amiga as well. Yeah. Did you ever use anyone else's like commercial software, or was most of your music always done by software that you made yourself?
No, up to the time when we switched, Musix was really the last iteration, and it was still like based on my original concept, but that already used MIDI input, so you could load up MIDI files into it and then program the sounds and the samples. But I always used my own tools. Never got into sound trackers or anything.
It's amazing, creating your own tools to make your own music. I was listening to an interview with you on my one of my favorite podcasts, the Retro Hour, and you mentioned that when you went to Rainbow Arts at first, you were kind of showing some of the programmers a thing or two about programming. I thought that was a really funny story. I don't know if I heard it on the Retro Hour.
I got a little bit off on the wrong foot with some of the senior programmers there, including Armin Gezert, who did Giana Sisters later. They were working on some games, and they couldn't get the scrolling smooth. Like it was a left-right scrolling, and they said there's just not enough CPU time to refresh the screen in the blank. And I came to them and say, hey, I've done this stuff before. It's actually quite easy. You don't have to refresh the whole thing in the blank. You can just start one line above the raster when it runs away from you, and then do like the next screen, build it up while the raster runs around the screen, and then once you're done, you switch over to the other memory address, and there's your screen. You don't have to like do it in a blank. That's probably too technical, but anyway, they were pissed because they thought like not possible, and then I showed them it was possible, and that got me a little bit into trouble with them. So in the first few months, they were like teasing me and playing pranks on me, but eventually I won them over and we became friends.
Oh, that is hilarious. Yeah, they were probably like, wait a minute, why is the musician teaching us how to program? Tell us how to do it better than we can,
Exactly.
right?
Totally.
Oh man. So yeah, so you started doing like a lot of work on the Commodore 64. What was it like when you saw the Amiga for the first time?
Yeah, the funny thing is, I actually got my own Amiga from the money I made with the sound monitor. So I had it before I even started at Rainbow Arts, and I was one of the first in my town who had one. But then I wasn't ready to jump from the C64. I was still like so much into C64 programming. I think I didn't get into Amiga programming until like a year and a half later. Um, but of course, I mean, I was blown away by the graphics possibilities and the few games that came out with like many more colors and the possibility of playing 4 channels of 8-bit samples. That was fascinating for me. Yeah, but I mean, at the time, also the Amiga was still upcoming, and the market wasn't that big at the time. The Commodore 64 market was still huge, so we had to concentrate on that and pull the last possibilities out of the machine for that. And then eventually, I think in the 88, I started to move over to the Amiga.
For the folks, like I said, who are new to it, can you, because the SID chip is a synthesized chip, and the Paula chip, which is the Amiga sound chip, is a sampled chip. Can you explain the difference between those two?
Yeah, so the SID chip has 3 voices that are synthesized, so you can select certain waveforms, and then you can apply filters and envelopes and things like that. But it always sounds like a synthesizer, except for those 4-bit samples that I introduced at some point. But then the Amiga went totally different route and presented 4 channels, and it was also stereo. Like 2 channels were on the left output and 2 channels on the right output of 8-bit samples, and it had a lot more memory than the C64. So you could like really use proper instruments that you would like record and sample into the Amiga and then play back with different pitches. And then so basically like the early samplers that were like cost like hundred thousands of dollars, like the Fairlight, things like that, the Amiga could do something similar, just like less than a decade later, could do something like that for a fraction of the cost. And that was fascinating, and it was a huge leap in gaming too. I mean, you could also sample like simple voice in there easily, and um, yeah, the fact that it was stereo, you could do some tricks with that and other things. It was really cool.
Yeah, I remember when I first heard the Amiga, I was like, "Wow, it's like listening to a CD." Like it was absolutely
Oh,
incredible. It was just blew my mind. And it's funny
yeah.
you mentioned that Amiga doing things at fraction of the price. Like in the video world, like in my world, I remember when Genlocks came out and when the video toaster came out, we were just like, oh my god, for under $10,000, you can have a video switching system in your house
Yep.
that's more powerful than the video switching system that my friend was using at ABC television. It was just like it seems to be the theme for Amiga.
Yeah, younger people who are growing up now, they don't know how difficult that was. I mean, nowadays, what you can do here with streaming and OBS, you have your own TV studio in your laptop, basically. It's quite remarkable.
It really is, and I don't take it for granted. The fact that I'm like literally sitting here in like a bedroom that I've converted into an office, and like you can broadcast to the whole world, or anywhere you
Yeah.
go, like you said with a laptop, you can literally broadcast to the world. It's amazing. I remember having me and my friends used to do a public access show, and we thought that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
cool because all the people like in our local area with that cable channel could watch it. But now it's just so cool. Yeah, so you talked about switching over, from SID to Paula, Commodore 64 to Amiga, and there's a lot of games like the Great Giana Sisters and Turrican that are both Commodore 64 and Amiga games. So what was that like? What was it like creating the music for both systems at one time?
Actually, oftentimes I would like start totally over on the Amiga and didn't do a port of the C64 music. Good example is R-Type. which we had the luck out of some brazen things that we did at Rainbow Arts, that controversy of Giana sisters, that it looked very much like Mario Brothers.
Just a little bit.
And that was all on purpose, actually. I mean, it was supposed to be kind of like a clone or ripoff. But we never expected Nintendo to really get mad at this at the time. But I think the English distribution, in Britain, they did some things that really angered Nintendo, where they said in the advertising, "Move over, brothers, here come the sisters," and then they sent us like a really angry letter threatening to sue Rainbow Arts, and then they decided to take the game off the market. But then it continued, other games like Katakis, for example, was very closely looking like an R-Type. I mean, it was an R-Type clone, and we got into hot water there because there was another English company that had actually licensed R-Type to make C64 and Amiga versions. So they were threatening us, but luckily they couldn't really do it, and they were on the other hand also taken by the technology that we had and by the quality of Katakis. So they made us an offer: hey, you change the name of Katakis, change some levels, and we won't sue you, and in return you make for us the R-Type, the official R-Type. So we did that, and there was a situation where I did two totally different music pieces for the title music between the C64 and the Amiga, because I felt like once I went to the Amiga, just porting the C64 music didn't seem appropriate. With the sample stuff, I wanted to do something that was appropriate for the Amiga, and the R-Type title is still like pretty well known.
Did you So you created them? R-Type's amazing. You created them independently, but do you have like a vision for like the final piece that you have in mind, and then you just use like what the Amiga is good at to get there, and what the Commodore 64 is good at to get there?
Yeah, I just knew that on the Amiga I wanted it to be a little bit more cinematic sounding. So like more orchestral type of instruments instead of synth sounds, and make it a little bit like a theme for a movie. That was the basic idea for it.
Yeah, your music is extremely cinematic. That's a great way to describe it. And we'll get into it, in a little while. But when you had the symphony play your music, it just sounded like I was listening to a John Williams score. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, that was thanks to the fantastic people I worked with there. They took it to a whole another level.
Absolutely. It was. It sounds absolutely beautiful. Do you want to, also, I heard on the Retro Hour podcast that you were inspired by a Madonna song for Great Giana Sisters, True Blue?
I wasn't inspired by it. This was a request by the boss of Rainbow Arts. He loved that track, and he said, try something like that for the title music, which is, by the way, something that some C64 and Giana Sisters fans don't even know, because they were all playing the pirated copy, which did not have that title song. What you hear, what most people reference as the title song, is actually the menu piece when you get in the game, because the title song was like a totally different screen, and it used those samples, so it was like a large chunk of memory, and they just omitted it in the early pirated versions. So
just skip right over it, like the old crack shows. Do you want to listen to a little Giana? I think I'm
sure,
over here on Lemon Amiga. Yeah, Giana's, it's one of the best video game scores of all time. Let's see.
Yeah, so that's might be the menu music then.
Let's see.
Oh no, actually that is the title music.
That's it.
Yeah. Of course, this is the Amiga version, which I did not translate myself.
That sounds great, Chris. It brings back so many great memories. So, and here's the intro music.
Excellent.
I understand if you have an original Giana Sisters box, it's quite valuable these days, right? Was it pulled off the shelves back then?
Yeah. I think they had 3 months of sales, and it was at that time the biggest selling game for Rainbow Arts. I mean, it was kind of sad that we had to pull it from the shelves, but at that time the company had already made a good chunk of money and financed a lot of other projects, so they were not messing with Nintendo any further. And we had a follow-up game that looked similar, had the same characters, and we immediately redid the graphics, and it became hard and heavy, which is another one. It's basically like the same type of gameplay, but it did not look like Mario Brothers anymore.
Don't mess with Nintendo.
Exactly.
They're still doing it to this day.
Totally.
Also, folks, if you notice over in the chat, Nightbot is posting a link to Chris's Patreon, as well as all of his links, his Bandcamp as well.
Oh, yeah,
if you want to join Chris's Patreon, which we're going to talk about in a little while, or buy some of his music on Bandcamp, you can also do !Chris in the chat. But as you can see, every 15 minutes, it drops some links into the chat. But !Chris, I'll do it right now. And that will that points to Chris's link tree, which is all the links, but then also the Bandcamp and the Patreon, which I singled out. But we're gonna talk about that in a moment. All right, Giana Sisters. Let me pause the music here for Giana Sisters. And so we were talking about Turrican and Turrican 2, which you mentioned might be your favorite piece of music that you ever composed. And like you said, the melodies are absolutely incredible. I hear that I can be driving down the road and all of a sudden the melodies to Turrican will just pop into my head. To me, like Turrican, when I think of Turrican, I think of a Japanese style game. What were some of your influences for Turrican?
Yeah, definitely Japanese games were like huge. We were fans. We went to the arcades all the time, and we also had like consoles then. And Japanese games were just like super cool, particularly action games. And I mean, I mentioned R-Type earlier. We were playing that constantly, but there were many others. And also the music that came out of Japan from game composers, that was very cool. And I mean, I still, of course, developed my own style over time, but there were a lot of influences also from Japanese composers, and that the driving action, that was always something that I liked, when things had a good beat going and then the melody on top, and that was just perfect for Turrican, for the type of game. And so it was I thought, like, once Turrican and Turrican 2 came around, that was what I had dreamt of creating musically when I said, like, I wanted to own a synthesizer in my early teens. So that was basically, I had reached that goal, and then just had fun with it.
So yeah, all your dreams as a kid came to fruition. It all came together for Turrican and Turrican 2. I was reading an interview with Julian Edgebrett from Fracture 5, and he mentioned that the Commodore 64 version of Turrican didn't have any background music, while the Amiga version did.
It had some.
Okay.
It had some, yeah, but not wall to wall, which we did in the Amiga version.
And he said that since it was his first project, he wanted to make it like a milestone in Amiga music, and that's why there were so many large number of tracks. And then he said, if you said it was enough, he'd say, no, I want more, even more pieces.
Yeah, he pushed me also, like, to do even more. Like when I was already satisfied with something, he would come and say, like, oh, make it longer, or do another track here. Instead of like reusing something. So that's how it became this wall-to-wall soundtrack. And yeah, a great collaboration.
It sounds like you guys worked really well with each other, just pushing each other to make it even better. He also talked
Absolutely.
about
It helps when you have a cheerleader.
oh, it helps. It helps
Like,
big time. Yeah, collaboration is the key. You know, like in when I work together with a great team, we all push each other to do our best. So collaboration, when you have the right partner to collaborate with, you can really go above and beyond. You know what you can do on your own, in my opinion. He also talked about a 7-voice engine for Turrican 2. Can you tell
yes.
us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when Turrican 2 came around, of course, we tried again to push the envelope in every way possible. And for the music, I actually had a colleague and friend who worked on the Atari ST. And he had created a lot of, so he ported a lot of my pieces to the Atari ST versions. And he had made a player there that could emulate the Amiga sound chip. So the Atari ST has a pretty basic sound chip on board, but it had also the possibility to play samples, but you had to use the CPU to push out the data. And it did not have like the Paula chip who would do all the 4 voices at the same time in the background. And so his CPU player was very, very efficient. He was really like an amazing, or is an amazing programmer. He's still around. And so I heard his Turrican 1 conversion of the title piece, and I thought like, wow, that piece of software that emulates what the Amiga chip does runs on the 68,000 CPU on the Atari ST. Wouldn't it be possible to port that back onto the Amiga? And then I had experimented a little bit with like mixing sample voices on the CPU. And there were some other programs that tried it too, like the Octalyzer was a tracker software that did 8 voices, but they all sounded bad because once you start like mixing on the CPU, you lose fidelity, and then the samples sound really rough, and it's not for like the quality out of the Paula chip, that wasn't what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But his player was like mixing 4 voices into one channel on the Atari ST. So I figured if I port that back with his help, then I could play it on one of the Amiga channels, get these 4 CPU voices, which had some degradation of sound quality. But then you have 3 Amiga voices who are original and pristine. So I could then decide which instruments would work on those CPU mixed voices, like drums and bass, things like that, and maybe some chord sounds that were not high in frequency, but then like hi-hats and bell type sounds and other things, I would play those on the original Amiga voices and they wouldn't be degraded. So that's how it became the 7-voice player.
Wow, that's incredible. I love how you found something, you worked with him, your friend, on the Atari, and then you backported it to Amiga. That makes the light bulb went off in your head, and you're like, wait a minute, I can use this program to push the Amiga even further.
And the core of that that programming he did for the mixing, that's like next level programming that I wasn't able to do at the time, because he was like he was like a mad scientist. But then the porting it back and getting it to work on the Amiga and things like that worked out. I'm thankful that he provided that core of his mixer to me, and we were able to do that.
Another great thing to come out of a collaboration.
Yes.
Yeah. When you were making the music for Turrican, did you have like strict time deadlines, or were you pretty open to create what you want to?
I was always late. Always late for everything. Even if the development started like a year early or something, I would have some ideas, of course, and I would develop those. But then it was always tight at the end. Deadlines and myself are always a little bit of a challenge. But I remember like a few days before the mastering, I was still sitting in the offices of Factor 5 and putting the finishing touches on the tunes and stuff like that. But that was just the times.
Yeah, sometimes deadlines can cut you short in the creative process, but sometimes they can, push you to get done more efficiently. And you don't.
If if you want to play Turrican 2 title, maybe
Let's do
the
it.
first minute or so, you can actually hear I composed it as a presentation of that 7 voice system, where in the beginning, like, one more voice is coming in, and another one, and another one, and another one. So the build up at the beginning was actually just like conceptualized as a showcase for the technology. And I mean, then it worked in the composition as well, but that's how that came to be.
Okay, great. I'll tell you what we do. Let's head over to your Bandcamp, Chris in the chat. And over on your Bandcamp, you can actually purchase this music from Chris, and he's got it in MP3 format as well as like lossless FLAC format, which is awesome. I downloaded a bunch in FLAC. It's super, super cool. Let me go over here. Boom, and we can start playing it. So you were saying you want to play the beginning of Turrican 2? I have to.
Yeah, but
it's weird.
But play it from the original sound version.
Yes.
Release, which is original sound version volume 1, and
yeah, the final fight, Turrican 2.
The final fight, Turrican 2. That's it.
So classic.
Cool. So
I think they like it, Chris.
You could also hear like a homage to the Turrican 1 title, and then it went into the new Turrican 2 title. So there was like a little a quick homage to the first one, and then like the new theme starts.
You tied both games together. That's really, really smart.
Yeah.
It's so legendary. I get everyone in the chat saying like, "This is my childhood right here. This brings me right back."
Right.
But the most important thing is like it's just such a great tune. Like you can enjoy it today just as much as you did back then.
Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful, Chris. If anyone wants to support Chris and pick this up, !Chris in the chat. You can go over to his Bandcamp. He's got tons of stuff over here on his Bandcamp, and he's also got an incredible Patreon where he creates things like this, like lucid dreaming, which is royalty-free music. So if you're a creator like myself, and you want to be able to have some incredible music in your videos or your live streams, you can get lucid dreaming from Chris. He's got all kinds of really cool royalty-free music that he has on his Patreon, and he releases to the public, which is it's super cool of you to do this, Chris, because having music rights these days is tricky. Like you can put up a really great video on YouTube, but if you get a copyright strike, it's a bad day.
Exactly. They're all like content ID free. So and I have 79 pieces on there now. So next month, every month I do a new one, and so next month will be 80, number 80.
Oh wow, that's a milestone. McDop3 says Lucid's awesome. I highly recommend it. Yeah, and I noticed some folks who made some awesome videos about Amiga 37. They also use lucid dreaming in their videos, and I'm super lucky. I got this at Amiga 37 as well, and it's a signed copy of lucid dreaming, which is amazing. Yeah, it's an honor to have this one, Chris.
I love it. Able to do that.
I love it. Well, yeah, I want to get more into the Patreon in a little bit too. I'm almost done with questions for you. I got my eye on the clock, and I want to make sure I can ask questions from the fans, the fans as well. In 1991, you became one of the first video game composers outside of Japan to release a studio album of your music, and this was followed by a Turrican CD in 1993. Like how is it that you think your music works just as well as like an independent music release as it does for the games?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And this was actually one of the things I had planned when we founded Audios and Kaiko, our own company, that we wanted to build out a music studio with real machines, you know, like a big mixer and synthesizers and MIDI and samplers and all that stuff to actually create studio music. And I could also already kind of see like where the industry was going. You know, it took a few more years, but eventually in the mid 90s, it was possible to make music that would be played from a CD. And of course, nowadays it's basically streamed in the background, and you have MP3 now and all that stuff. But I could see like where the industry was heading, and that was a good investment, I thought, to create studio music as well. And then of course the idea of like taking the game music I had already produced and putting that out on CDs for the fans. And that first album was called Shades in '91, and as a homage, of course, to my big break. And it actually sold so well without a record company behind it. We sold it basically at trade shows and mail order, and with the help of magazines. And it sold 12,000 copies and financed actually the development of a big chunk of Apedia and other things at Kaiko for quite a while. Yeah.
Apedia is also another great game, another great soundtrack. It's one of my favorites. I love
Milestone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolute milestone on the Amiga. Yeah.
It really is. But speaking of Shades, you know, Shades. I guess after Shades came out, someone approached you to do an actual symphony orchestra of Shades, and that was just absolutely stunning. Can you tell us a little bit about how your music became played by an entire symphony orchestra?
Yeah, so we have to jump ahead into the 2000s. So I was already living in the US and working for Factor 5 near San Francisco. And I had a fan that would like write me letters, how he's my biggest fan. And he was like, I don't know, I think the first letter he wrote when he was like 14 or 15. And so I thought like, oh yeah, getting a lot of letters like that. But he said already like very early on, he would like to do concerts with my music. That was his career goal, and he made it happen. So ultimately, he might be my biggest fan of all time. So his name is Thomas Böker, and he started to develop these concert events at Games Convention in Leipzig in like 2003 or 2004 was the first one. And so it was like an opening concert for the show. It was like a game show similar to Gamescom. And yeah, it was super well received. He worked with all kinds of composers and arrangers and the orchestras and put that together. And then a few years into it, a radio station in Germany, big radio station, have their own orchestra, own radio symphony orchestra. The WDR, they asked him to produce like a special concert. And he suggested we were going to take music all from Chris. And that became Symphonic Shades. And yeah, so that was an absolute mind-boggling experience. And I could have never dreamt about something like that when I started out making music, that something like that would ever happen.
Let's take a look at that. There's a clip of it up here on YouTube. I got Giana Sisters and Turrican too. Mr. Cola, thank you so much for the raid, and Raf Decaf, thank you so much for the follow, and Dan Linden, thank you so much for the subscription, as well as Sigerborn. Thank you so much, guys. Let's go over here to the desktop and let's check this out. A symphony orchestra playing the great Giana Sisters. Wow.
There it is.
It sounds incredible.
it's like bringing me right back.
It's so
When I
beautiful.
was sitting in that audience, you know, I had tears running down my cheeks when they were performing this. By the way, the orchestrator was another Amiga music legend from the scene, from the demo scene. I think his name was on the Amiga was Purple Motion. Jonne Valtonen is his name, and he a few years after his Amiga career, he decided to learn orchestration and went to like conservatory and stuff like that, and he made the arrangement.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love how Amiga is kind of like a family, and there's so many talented people in the Amiga community, and you kind of cross paths with them, you know, outside of Amiga as well. That's pretty awesome. When I was listening to that music, to me it sounded like it could be a John Williams soundtrack to, you know, Star Wars or Jurassic Park. Is John Williams someone who you admire?
Totally. My number one film composer still to this day, of course.
He's the best. Yeah, he's absolutely incredible. And you know, it's incredible to me how your music translated so well to the symphony. That was really, really cool. All right, well, I want to let's jump forward again. We kind of jump forward. I want to get to the audience questions because I know we're coming up on like an hour here. Just, you know, do you want to talk a little bit about your move to the U.S., like why you moved to the U.S.?
Yeah, so in the mid '90s, the game development in Germany was actually really coming to a halt in a way. Since then they have recovered somewhat, but everything was basically happening overseas, be it in Japan or in England or in the US. And Factor 5 had actually done the jump over the big water already in the mid '90s, and they were developing for consoles together with LucasArts. They had their office nearby, and so they were working on a Star Wars game, and I visited them the year before, and they flat out asked me if I'm interested to work on the Star Wars game because it was for the Nintendo 64, and that was the last console really that had like cartridges instead of like CD drive or something like that, where you could have a lot of memory. So the cartridge was kind of limited on space. Otherwise, the Nintendo 64 was a very capable machine, but the music couldn't be like played back as MP3 or streaming. That was just not in the cards. It had to be programmed. So it was one of the last machines where you had to go in and sample the instruments and program those, and then as I said, that's when musics came about. Basically like a further development of my old tools. And then we used MIDI at the time. That made the composition part easier, but the music that plays back on the machine is still like very similar to what we did on earlier machines. So there was a player program that would use the notes and then play the samples back on different channels. And I think in Rogue Squadron we had, since it was like an adaptation of John Williams music, in the title music I think we had like around 24 voices playing, mixed on their CPU, and they were already like higher quality samples than on the Amiga. And then in game I think we had like around 14 to 16 voices that we could utilize while the game was playing.
Did you enjoy, like, you know, the later machines, you know, like the N64 and the Windows? Like, did you enjoy composing for those as much as you did like working within the limitations of the Commodore 64 and the Amiga? How was that for you?
All has its pros and cons, right? I mean, you know, there's always progress, so you have to go with the times. Modern games, you create the music basically in a studio setting, and then you maybe cut it up to make it interactive or something like that. But the composition is still the same. I mean, you try to find like a compelling melody and a good background music for a game. It's gotten somewhat easier to make game music. because of that. But sometimes it's also fun to like just limit yourself. I do that nowadays sometimes when I have all the freedom. Maybe I go back and say, hey, I'm gonna make music with just these type of sounds, and limit myself a little bit just to create something unique.
Sometimes the limitations can really get your creativity going,
Absolutely.
And it can point you in a direction, right? Like when you can do anything you want, sometimes you can get a little bit lost, but if you have some limitations,
absolutely.
yeah. I've got Star Wars Rogue Squadron here. Let's take a quick listen. You were talking about the main title. Let's play the main title track, and then I want to talk about just a couple other things, and then we'll do some viewer questions for Chris.
Yeah, and the main title for Rogue Squadron is actually my own composition. It's just supposed to sound like Star Wars.
Oh, okay. Is that what I should play, or should I play a different one?
No, sure.
Okay.
That one is fine. Yeah. So that's the Star Wars title you have queued up, I think. If you go above, it's the Rogue Squadron.
Oh, Rogue Squadron, yeah. Oh, it sounds so good.
The interesting part here is, so I had to sample all like these orchestral sounds, from strings, trumpets, timpani, all those things into there, and then optimize them, because it was still like pretty tight memory wise. And the other thing is, I'm not a classically trained composer, so I actually had to I was reading up on orchestration, and I was reading a lot of books about it and listening to a lot of soundtracks, and then of course listening to John Williams music. But it was still I was frightened of this project, because just trying to make something that sounds like Star Wars and John Williams, it was daunting.
I can imagine, because here you are trying to compose music just like your hero, essentially. And for the Star Wars franchise, like the biggest franchise in the world.
Exactly. After the game was finished, I actually had developed some problems with my attendance, carpal tunnel kind of things, because I was so tense during those 9 months of development. Luckily it got better over time, but I couldn't even listen back to the music for another year or so, because I thought oh my god, what have I done? But then when I listened back to it later, I thought oh, it's actually not too bad. It's pretty good, actually. Yeah,
you knocked it out of the park, Chris. It sounds it's perfect. It's its own thing, but at the same time has all the Star Wars vibes. You can tell it's Star Wars. Playa Valley, thank you so much for the raid. I appreciate that, Playa, and the resub. You rock, brother. Was that more of a Simon 69 is asking? Is that more of a MIDI approach or a tracker approach for the Star Wars Rogue Squadron?
That was MIDI.
MIDI, yeah.
MIDI, but it was still all the instruments had to live as samples on the cartridge.
Got it. So there's still some limitations, and it was still
samples, because later we were able to use MP3 or an Arch-Vorbis file format, and just produce the whole track in the studio like we would produce any type of music. But that was later.
Got it. Yeah, Legions is asking if you referred to the SNES games for inspiration for the Rogue Squadron music.
That too, yeah. Mm-hmm. So there were some great Star Wars games on the Super Nintendo as well.
Excellent. I think a lot of folks want to ask some questions. I just want to get to your Patreon and your Bandcamp and just wrap it up. So you were at Factor 5 in San Francisco, and then that came to an end, and you kind of went off doing some more projects on your own. Is that correct?
Yes. So in 2008, when the whole economy was kind of collapsing, Factor 5 went under. Uh, Not necessarily their own fault. It was just the when you have like a 70, 80 piece of development studio with 70, 80 people working there, and all of a sudden the funding dries up because your publishers can't afford it anymore themselves. Then it's like very quickly comes to an end. And then we tried some other stuff after with a smaller team, still Factor 5 people. We did this touch fish project on the iOS, and some other stuff. And I became freelancer again, um, self-employed, and have gotten by. I'm still doing my Chris Huelsbeck productions. Even now working on some new projects, and keep doing. Yeah, the Patreon, as you mentioned, is an important thing that I'm doing. Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't know what you else had in that context.
Well, I know.
So
Another thing that
I'll
was
let you ask the questions.
well, what
Yeah.
was interesting to me also, I believe you were traveling around the country, right? And sort of a mobile office, right, in Winnebago. That sounds like a lot of fun. Is that what you?
Similar to, yeah. I don't think the European people probably don't know what a Winnebago is, but basically like a motorhome, like a camper with an engine attached. Yeah, the thing was, the San Francisco Bay Area just got a little bit expensive in the mid 2010s, and we were thinking about resettling. And I thought about like, oh, am I going back to Germany, or are we going to go like to a part of the country where the cost of living is cheaper, all those things. And so we decided instead to have an adventure, because we didn't know what we wanted to do. So we sold our house and moved into this high-end camper, and then traveled around for a while. So we to also like see something of the US. I had been there for a good 15 years, and I hadn't seen much. So that was the right adventure at that time. But now it's actually going the other way again. We got settled again in 2019. We bought some land in the southeastern part of Arizona where we really liked it. And this is the thing, if we hadn't done the motorhome, we would have never discovered this. So I bought a piece of land, and now we're building an off-grid property out with plans to build a proper house. And I will have like a studio room in there and stuff like that. So those are my plans going forward. And we might still travel around, but we'll do it like part-time.
That worked out really well. You took some time off after Factor 5, you got to explore the country. I mean, America is so large and it's so varied. You know, you have desert, you have mountains, you have forests. It's pretty. I still haven't seen the whole country myself, and I've been to like 46 states, and I'm still missing some really important ones. So it's really cool how you can see so much in one place. Yeah. So you're working on your Patreon now, which is awesome. Like I mentioned before, Chris makes royalty-free music on his Patreon. So if you're a content creator like myself and you need some incredible music to play, you know, for your streams or for your YouTube videos, it's very inexpensive to become a patron of Chris. You can do !Chris in the chat. It's also doing automatic. It's also placing automatically. It'll post a link to his Patreon, also his Bandcamp, and his Linktree with all of his links there, including Chris Huelsbeck Productions.
But thanks, Bill, for becoming a supporter and patron as well.
Oh, it's the least I can do. I also picked up this. Beautiful piece here. This is now become like one of my favorite possessions. This is the orchestral album of Turrican 2, and it's
the orchestra. Amazing production. Again, collaboration with Thomas Böker and his writing team of orchestrators and arrangers, and it sounds absolutely like a Hollywood film music production.
It really does. You know, we can play some of it later if we have time. I played some of it on my stream last time, but It's like when I put on my headphones, I put on my turntable, and I literally feel like I'm listening to this score, a John Williams score to like a Hollywood movie. It's incredible. Where's my overhead cam here? Boom, 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 boom,
And
boom.
most of these big packages are unfortunately sold out now, but the soundtrack itself is still on Bandcamp, of course, in full CD quality and stuff like that. And there's even a follow-up album, the Turrican Orchestral Selections is another one that we did with the same orchestra, same team. And yeah, there's like this is the big package with the art prints.
I love these art prints. They're beautiful.
I think there might be still like I think we have like a handful of them left because they were all limited. This was financed by Kickstarter a few years back, and these packages here, they're like a limited edition.
It was always my dream to have Chris Huelsbeck on vinyl, so I'm really lucky that I was able to get this before they sold out. It's awesome, and it comes with the CD and as well as a Bandcamp code as well. It's really beautiful, Chris. Awesome stuff. All right, let's go. It's beautiful. Let's go back here. And
again, the Patreon that started as kind of like a hobby project a few years ago, but now it has grown into an important income stream for me. You know, I always say, like, for you it's a buck, for me it's an income, because the more people join, of course, the more I can do with it and for it. And we're actually pretty close to like the point where I have a goal in there to create 2 pieces a month. So the more people join, the more music will be created.
Oh, that's beautiful, Chris. And thank you for being a patron of mine. I really appreciate that. I was blown away when you became a patron of mine. I was like, oh, thank you. So this is an honor to be to have you supporting me. I mean, it really means a lot. The Patreon for me is a lot of fun, but it's actually very useful too, and I use it to I try and invest money back into the community. So when someone comes out with a new game, like, I buy it no matter what. I'm gonna buying your stuff. I bought the album
That's
with the
what
Patreon music. So
I'm doing. I'm paying it forward to a number of people that I think are really cool.
Oh, thank you. I really, really appreciate that. Chris, I want to ask some questions from the audience, but I want to ask you, do you have anything else that you want to add before we go to audience questions?
Just watch out. In the next few months there will be a game announced that I completed in November. It hasn't been announced yet, that's why I can't talk about it, but I'm super proud of what I've done there, and it's a little bit larger project. You know, I've done a lot of like indie games over the years now, but this one is like a proper studio, proper release. So I'm looking forward to the announcement there. And then I'm working on 2 other games that are hopefully finished this year. One is Tiny Thor, which is another retro style game, which is super fun. And then the other one is called Operation High Jump from a Spanish company, Mansion Games, and they're now trying to finish that up this year and doing music for that. So there's a whole bunch of things going on, and then hopefully eventually I can also do live stream from my new house, maybe next year, from my new studio that I want to build.
That'd be amazing, Chris. Congratulations on buying the land, and good luck building the house. And when the studio is up and running, let me know, and we can do another stream, or I'll help you promote your stream. I'm sure it'll be awesome. I saw you do a couple of streams recently, which is really cool.
Yeah, I sometimes do like these just music and chatting. So I play music from the Patreon project, since there's so much music to draw from already, and then I chat with people in the chat room on YouTube.
Oh, that's really cool. It's really cool how dedicated to the community you are, because, like I said, you're a legend, and the fact that you have so much interaction with so many fans is great. And the thing that's great about the Patreon is not just a Patreon where you can say, oh, I like this person's streams, or I like this person's music, I just want to support them, but you actually get value for it too. Like, you become a patron and you can actually use the music. Your Patreon is useful. If you're a content creator,
exactly.
you can use the music in your own streams or in your own YouTube videos. So it's really cool. Awesome, Chris. Thanks so much. Let's do some audience Q&A. I'm going to start with the folks who sent in the questions in advance. Some of them are my awesome Patreons. I really appreciate that. Just some of the questions you already answered. Maya82 was asking about I'll just say what she wants to say to you. She said, because you already answered some of her questions, but she said, when the WDR Symphony Orchestra played your music and released it, like, how did you feel? Because I listened to it multiple times, and of course, my favorite is the Giana sisters' music. I'm so forever thankful for that sound that brings me back to my happy place whenever I hear it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, she's just awesome.
Incredible evening that was, and the music lives on.
Yes, it does. And Jake the dog is he's got a question. He says, Quick and Silva plagiarizes upon a lot of IPs and pokes great fun at them. Are there hidden licks?
Homage.
Exactly. Yeah, it's an homage. Are there hidden licks and bits in the soundtrack as well, or did you want to keep stay original with the game soundtrack?
No, the soundtrack was completely original. Yeah, just a fun project. Quick and Silva was like, we needed money for finishing up Apedia, and there was this disc magazine in Germany who paid like they paid pretty good money for really at the time pretty bad games we thought that they were putting out, and we thought like, oh, let's do something fun. So within a few weeks we had that Quick and Silva done. And yeah, there's a few characters in there but I don't see those as like plagiarism, like maybe Giana sisters was. It was more like a homage to all these different things.
Yeah. That makes sense. And Jake's got more
Fun
questions.
Fun little project, and it helped us to finish Apedia.
Oh, excellent! I'm gonna have to go back and play some of that again. It's been a while. And Apedia, well, if it helps Apedia, that's a great thing. Yeah. He also said, if you can go back in time and claim having composed another great game soundtrack, which one would it be? One that you wish that you could have done.
Oh yeah, well, Metroid Prime on the Nintendo 64 and the later GameCube versions. So that Metroid would have been a fun one to do, because it's similar to Turrican also, but more. It's got a slightly different vibe to it too. That would have been something like that. Would have been fun to do.
Very cool. C64 Television asked, did you ever record the music to Unknown Realm, The Siege Perils, like the devs claimed you were going to do?
I have done compositions for those, and I think they did release some on their page. I don't know what's going on. I have no insight, unfortunately.
Okay. Corbo asked, do you like the 8-bit versions or the orchestral versions better of your tracks?
I think there's so that's really tough to answer.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm fond for both of them in their own context.
That makes it.
By the way, one fun tidbit there is on the we had in Symphonic Shades, we also of course were featuring Shades, the composition that I did for the magazine. So that was also orchestrated, but we thought it would be fun if one of the lead voices there would be played by a SID chip. So we actually set up a laptop with an emulator of the SID chip, and we had the pianist, keyboarder of the orchestra, play the SID sound in the orchestra setting.
Oh, that is really to mix in the SID sound with the orchestra. That's so cool. It reminds me, I got this cool thing here, Chris. It's you might like this too. It's actually it's a USB SID player, and you put an actual SID. Yeah, you actually put a SID chip into it, and then you can hook it up with USB, and you can hook it up to your Amiga if you have a USB, or just your PC, and you can play the SID tunes right from the PC. But instead of it being like emulated, it's actually synthesized on the chip, which is super cool.
Wow, that's nice. That's very cool. I'd like to have one. It's tough to come by a good SID chip these days.
I'm waiting for one to come in the mail right now from my friend Marvin over in the Netherlands. So maybe I'll talk to him and I'll get you one too.
Yeah, record a version of Shades of that, and I'll tell you if it's a good one.
Okay, perfect. Playavelli is asking, what are your memories of Richard Joseph, the legend? Did you ever meet Richard in person, and was there ever a collaboration planned?
I think I met him at one of the events. I'm not quite sure if it was one of the early trade shows in London. We went to what was ECTS shows in London in the early 90s. I may have met him there. I'm definitely aware of his stuff. Um, but yeah, no, but there was never a collaboration of any sort.
Okay. Ty Racer is asking, what was your inspiration for Jim Power's outstanding intro music? And is there any way to explain that? It's been stuck in his head for decades.
Awesome. Yeah, Jim Power was again just like similar to Turrican. The most of the inspiration came from Japanese consoles and arcade games, and I just had fun with it. And it was just like, oh, there's another game that's kind of like has a little bit of a Turrican vibe. So I just did it. And one of my coolest projects to date, because it was ported to so many different platforms, including a PC Engine version for the CD version of the PC Engine in Japan. So that was my first soundtrack that I did in the studio. I ported the music to the studio with all our synths and samplers and all that stuff, and put that on the CD.
And then it played off the CD tracks on the
Yeah.
CD. Cool.
The second one I did was Tunnel B1. Was for PlayStation, which had a CD drive where you could play music off the CD tracks during the game, and that was also very like cinematic, and a lot of like ambient tracks, and yeah, that was fun.
Excellent. I'm going to try. There's quite a few questions, so if you need to go, I understand, but I'm just going to go through them as quick as I can. Yeah,
I'd like to wrap up pretty soon. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. We have Vector Funk asking, I'm sorry, Proton Fig. Proton Fig said there's an ongoing game music remix competition at csdb.dk. Jason Page has made marvelous 2-SID remix of R-Type on the Amiga. Have you heard of that?
I think I saw something a few days ago. I gotta look that up again.
Okay.
But yeah, I always listen to like a lot of fans send me like remixes and or point me to like a new remix on OC Remix or Amiga Remix or the C64 remix websites, and I listen to those, and then yeah.
Excellent.
Cool.
Amiga Bill's illegitimate son said, oh, okay, got it. He was just asking how many channels your music used on the Amiga, but I think we talked about that. 4 channels, and then you made the hack. Yeah.
Yeah, in-game it's usually 4 channels, with 1 channel just like it's mostly sound effects. So really the in-game music of Turrican over all the different versions on the Amiga is usually composed for 3 voices, but I do some tricks with that TMFX system to get more out of it. Just as a quick technical thing there, when you play a note on TMFX, it actually starts a little script, a programming script, that then can like do things where I combine like drum sounds with bass sounds and things like that. So it sounds like it's more voices, but it's really just 1 voice. And so the compositions are 3 voice compositions, with the 4th one mostly playing sound effects, and the intro music of Turrican 2 and 3 are 7 voice, and the credits music and high score and all that stuff, that's all 7 voice.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your detailed responses. I'm going to try and ask a couple more questions. If you need to go, that's cool. We'll go quick. Vector Funk asked what music were you listening to in the early 80s and 90s. You kind of answered that one already. That was your Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream, right? Some of those. Yeah, awesome.
The late Vangelis mentioned, I think.
So good. Yeah, so good.
Yeah. I did a few months ago when he passed away, I did a homage on my Patreon. So there's a piece on my Patreon that's like Vangelis style.
Vangelis is just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Amiga Fish has got an interesting one. Are you familiar with the new audio features of the Vampire SA? And if so, what do you think of them?
I'm not aware.
No, okay, yeah, it's got some some enhancements to. They've done some like really cool enhancements to the audio chip and the video chip as well.
I'd like to hear it, so I'll hopefully somebody posts a link you can send me. I'll look that up.
Amiga Malta said regarding Giana's sister's name, was it derived from the Italian singer Giana Nani, who had a famous song for Italy?
That was in fact the thing. So when when we realized how popular the game was with the German reviewers who had imported it from Japan, Mario Brothers. The boss of Rainbow had said, "Oh, we can do a game like that in a few weeks," And instead of Mario Brothers, we call it Giana Sisters. From Gianna Nannini was one of his idols of like rock music. And when you look at the intro screen of the C64 version, you also see that it's written with 2N, which is the same as Gianna Nannini's first name. And then the graphic artist who did the airbrush for the cover, for the hardcover, he made a mistake and left out one N. And that's how it became Giana.
Oh, wow.
It was one N.
It was all a mistake.
There was no time to fix that. Yeah, it was a mistake, exactly.
Oh,
but that's exactly how that happened.
That is really, really cool. I know you got one, Chris. I'll ask one last question. There's still a bunch here, but Sepp is a huge supporter of mine. He just came with a question. And he said, it's a good one to wrap up with. He said, in all your life in Germany and the USA, what is like your best and worst experience?
Oh man, I mean, there's so many like good experiences. Worst, I couldn't even like. I try to not think about bad things.
Forget the bad things. I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it was a big blow to us when Factor 5 US went under. Nobody expected that to happen, and it was a challenge for all of us. But there's a lot of things that happen. But I mean, one of the happiest things that ever happened to me was obviously Symphonic Shades.
That must have been incredible seeing your music being played by Symphony. That is absolutely incredible. Yeah. Folks, I know
I wish my grandma could have seen that, but she passed away a decade earlier. But she would have been so proud and yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm sure she would have been extremely proud. You should be very proud. And it's just an honor having you on today, Chris. Thanks so much for your time. Sorry if I couldn't get to everyone's questions. I know I missed some folks in the chat, but
maybe we can do this again sometime. Let's meet up again in a year or so and do something. I mean, there's still a lot of stuff.
Whenever you want to come on, Chris, you're welcome to come on anytime. Maybe when you're in your new place, you can show us your new place, and instead of doing like a history, you can just say what we're doing now, and we can do a whole stream can be a Q&A.
That would be fun, yeah.
Awesome, Chris. Thank you so much for coming on today, Chris. Again, everyone, / Chris in the chat. Go support Chris on his Patreon.
Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in, and until next time.
Cheers, Chris. Thank you so much. I'll see you on Patreon. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.